What's up, everyone? It's Jessica Muñoz here in San Juan, Puerto Rico, founder of LSC Swag. It's an extension of one of the other grassroots initiative that I have, which is La Salita Cafe. And I'm excited to be on this podcast.
I'm excited to have you on. I mean, obviously, like we were just saying, I'm rocking one of your shirts. I've had this shirt for a while.
Mm-hmm.
I buy everything off of Instagram now, man. Like, because I never liked going to the mall. I don't like going to the store, and so I'm the kind of person, if I see it, I like it, I buy it. I don't even like trying stuff on. My wife had to teach me about trying stuff on. So I just buy everything. Yeah, I got to listen to her.
Yeah.
But I buy everything off Instagram, and I've been following you guys for a while now, and it's, you guys, every time there's a badass shirt like this, I buy it, just why not, right? It's better than going to the store. But the problem with going to like a mall or a store is that you're there, and so you're like, at least I feel like I'm here, I have to leave with something. And then you end up not leaving with something that you love absolutely, right?
Yeah.
But with the internet, I'm not going to find this at the stores, I don't think. So
no.
And it's the added factor of something you can't find in the stores, right? Like where did you buy that? Oh, you got to follow this account, you got to follow LSC Swag if you want the merch. But I thank you so much for coming on. I explained a little bit to everybody, to me, what I'm reading here, and I've known this before, but una marca ética, social y solidaria de Puerto Rico. So that's my Spanish right there. But so ethical brand, social, and I mean, how would you say it? You're in solidarity with various social justice and environmental justice movements, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's basically a social justice brand, but the ethics of our brand are go full circle. So I take very seriously where I source the fabrics, where it's manufactured. I make sure that it's ethical in every possible way. And when I say that, is that we either use organic material, recycled material, that the salary and wages are fair, that the conditions are fair, that they reduce energy, water waste. One of the good things on printing on demand, if you will, versus what you find at the store, is that a lot of merch just gets wasted and end up in landfills.
Or they send it to Africa. I mean, you see, like, or Middle East, you'll see like poor ass people, and their house just got bombed, and they're wearing Hugo Boss shirts, because what they do is that, it's crazy. Like they want to, Hugo Boss wants to sell you a shirt for $100, but if they don't sell it that season, they just throw it away or something, right? Or they burn it. Like, what's that? Burberry burned like millions of dollars of merch every year.
Yeah. So here's the thing. I actually have a background in the fashion industry. Wow. And the markup in the fashion industry is insane versus smaller companies like me, where my margins are very thin. So just the model has to be that way, because they para darte un ejemplo, so they make it for $10, they sell it for $110, but then if it doesn't sell, like you said, in that season, since sadly everyone now is into fast fashion, ¿qué quiere decir eso? They want the latest and greatest. The only way to do that is to source very, very cheap, get everything from China, pay low wages, cut corners in every possible way. It's the only way you can see a model wearing one thing and it be in Sarah's or H&M's or whatever men's store, almost identical for like $15. The only way to do that is unethical waste. But that's unfortunately what society is. Media, these big fashion brands, they're all sort of programming us to think that way, unfortunately.
Well, I mean, it's capitalism too, right? I mean, right? I mean, capitalism. If you want to be a successful capitalist, you can't worry about the environment. You can't worry about, ethical sourcing and stuff like that. Because the person who wants to make the most money is going to give you the cheapest. The iPhone destroys that river in China, right? Destroying people's lives, paying no cents on the dollar. Your Nikes are paying pennies on the dollar to some kid in India. And
I mean, it is.
No, go ahead.
I'm sorry. It is capitalism, but we vote with our dollars, right?
Right.
So we have a choice to listen to the marketing that we see on TV, or we have a choice. The same goes for the news media. We have a choice if we're gonna listen to NPR versus reading the New York Post. That there's a huge quality difference. So it's also the consumers, right? I mean, I think that education starts in the home and it starts internally on where you want to.
The consumers have to be there, though, right? And the good thing about a company like you is that the culture's changing. It's actually becoming cool to buy something that's ethically sourced.
Exactly.
And stuff like that.
Yeah. Or that's we hope that the trend to be more advanced in our thinking and have more of a social conscious. We hope that it continues, right? And that it's not a fad.
Yeah, I mean, in anything you do, any business you start, you have to deal with that. Are you going to do the cheapest? Are you going to do it the most unethically? Or are you going to do something special that takes harder to do and is more expensive to do? And the same thing when I started this media company. To be in media, the name of the game is eyeballs, right? So there's an urge to give out junk, right? Because it's all about eyeballs, and those people are going to make a lot of money. But with Mono and Guac Media, we're like, no, I'd rather do something special that takes time to do, that's smarter, that not everybody's going to want, but the people who really want it. You're also trying to change the culture, right? You're trying to
exactly,
like you're saying, you're offering things that weren't available before, so maybe that changes the way people view shopping.
Exactly.
So how'd you get into it?
You're right.
I mean, how'd you get into it?
So actually, I have a grassroots initiative that's La Salita Cafe. With La Salita Cafe, this was well before the hurricane here in Puerto Rico in 2017. So basically, because I'm a poet, I also write, and so I wanted to. At that time, I saw a trend where the open mic scene was just no longer as popular. O sea que there were still places, but not like the year before or previous to that. So I slowly, I'm all about data. So I started to see the slow trend, and it itched at me. And I said, you know what? I'm gonna do an open mic and see how it rolls. And so with that, the intention was to open up a restaurant, or organic, all locally sourced products and goods. Y de ahí tener una sala where we would have poets and live music, bomba y plena, or be something very typical of our culture. Yeah, very very typical of what we would do, and hence came the name La Salita Cafe, which La Salita. From there, what I did was I started to do these open mics all around the island. So I got I'm the only ¿cómo que se dice? I'm the only venue in Puerto Rico so far that can do slam poetry, that can qualify in order to compete. And so what I would do is I would have these all over the islands, because in order to have a team that would represent Puerto Rico, pues claro, it should be from every pueblo, and then within them, they sort of compete to see
like
who
a
would
tournament
be
kind of. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's where it sort of spun off. I hit a little bit of a rocky start. I long story short, I left the deposit to a place who it turned out to be a scammer. I'm in the courts. I won the court, whatever. Pero entonces la iniciativa, so it can't die, right? Until I get my money back from all of that, I decided to continue with the venues. Then came Hurricane Maria, and then we sort of for me, the focus wasn't necessarily the open mics, but it was more of the grassroots work that we were doing. Right. So we sort of focused more on that. And so now it's just sort of became a hybrid of, okay, now that need isn't necessarily there. Then came COVID, so I still can't necessarily do these venues, but I know we need a voice, and I'm an activist also, and so I feel like how else can I reach out to people? And I said, Diablo, us. The beautiful thing about poets is that our spoken word poetry, particularly, is that we touch all these taboo topics, and so I said, well, let's just put it on merch. And that whole ethical concept, I'll just work hard to make sure I get the fabrics, the warehouses. I was trying to do it in Puerto Rico, pero unfortunately the legislation and the structure here, it just is very challenging to manufacture sustainably. It can be done, but it will be double the cost. I mean, we're just very, very behind in that scene, and so that's sort of where I'm at. That's where it sort of was the hybrid, and so now COVID, it seems like it's gonna be, espero, a thing of the past. More manageable at least, and so now I can slowly start going back to the open mics until I open up my own venue. But the merch scene, I think, is the best way in order to get the voice of the social issues that are happening today, not only in Puerto Rico but
all around the world.
Exactly. It's the best way to voice that and get further reach.
And I was reading about like how during the pandemic, a lot of the brick and mortar clothing stores were going under, and it was actually the direct to consumers that are like the wave of the future, right? It's companies like yours that are especially made to order, right? So you already are having a fan base, and like I follow your account because I'm thinking I like what they do. So if I want a shirt in the future, I already bought a shirt. If I want a shirt in the future, where am I most likely to find a shirt that I like? Well, these people, because I already know what they do. It's not like having, you know what I mean? It's not like wandering the mall like a zombie, going to Macy's or whatever. But this sounds like your fucking motto, poesía and rebeldía. Like,
exactly.
Well, for me, they're the same thing, right? Good poetry is rebellion, right? It's taking the status quo and either making you examine it, criticize it, turn it on its head. Where does that all start from? You're a poet, activist. Where does this? Were you born on the island? I mean, where does this?
I was born on the island, but I lived for many years in New York. And I've always sort of been a black sheep of the family.
For leaving or what? Why?
No, just my way of thinking and just my rebellious ways. I was, yeah, always. And so. Actually, it's a funny story. I've never been a fan of institutionalized learning. And so while I always got good grades, it wasn't necessarily with a lot of effort because particularly in high school where I cut all the time. And so I can't remember when, maybe it was like 10th grade in high school. Sorry, I'm having special shout. I'm a little bit...
I'm on my third cup, No,
wow, 3 cups. Wow, yeah. You're. This is my second. That's a lot for me.
No, third. I mean, I used to drink 5, 6 cups, and then people were like, "Don't do that," And I'm like, I've been drinking coffee since I can remember. Café con pan.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, but I had to reduce it. The caffeine is a killer. Okay, it's good. It's hard to say no, right? Yeah. Because it's good.
Makes you feel good and everything. Oof.
Yeah, especially when it's local.
Oh, that's true.
So yeah, I think it was like in 10th grade. I can't remember precisely, but so back in the day, I don't know if they do that now, but back in the day in high school, you had the opportunity of taking electives that had no impact towards your grade or your degree, but you had some classes. So I decided to take one on horror. I'm still a huge horror buff. And so we had a project where we had to write something, and it was that professor that changed my life in essence. And he took a look at what I was reading that had nothing to do with the project, but it happened to be within the same book. And he said, wow, you're a street poet. And I was like, what the, because back in the day, yeah, I mean, what they teach you in school isn't necessarily any type of authors or poets that I can relate to in any way.
Right.
So when I thought poetry, it was all like this beautiful shit, Rose Red, or just very existential shit that
Whitman
just
and fucking British poets and shit like that.
Yeah, I just couldn't connect with it, right? So while it was beautiful on its own, I was never drawn to it. So when he told me I was a street poet, I was like, what the fuck? And then he was like, listen, meet me after class, da, 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 da. So we just had real open conversation, and he was like, listen, with your energy, which is I was a rebel in every single way. You can use that in your poetry. You're a street poet. Look up online, go to the libraries and find urban poetry, street poetry, spoken word poetry. And you might be able to find a connection there. You can use that energy or that anger that you have inside you and maybe find a path for yourself. And he fucking hit it on the nail. That's where I found Maya Angelou. That's where I found Luis Lloren, who was one of the poets here that was huge on the independence movement, and amongst a ton of others. I mean, he saw it, he read me, and it changed me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm against. I have a huge problem with institutionalized anything, but especially education, because education is so. Your education is how you find your identity. So why would you go to a place where they're trying to teach everybody the same way, the same thing? I mean, schools just train you for conformity. They just train you to conform to society, right?
Exactly.
And if you have a rebellious streak, then you're fucking ADD or you got behavior problems. That means you just don't want to take the programming. But the good thing is, like you said, it's like it's the teachers you meet, the professors, one or two your whole life if you're lucky, right?
Yeah,
and they'll
bingo.
change your whole life. They'll change your whole life.
Yep.
And that's a way, like, like people think that, going to college, I'm going to get an education. That's not true. You go to college, and if you're lucky, you run into that professor who's really going to open your eyes, right?
Right.
And
right.
so
I mean, when you go into college, you're basically just learning a trade, right? That's what it is. It's a more advanced trade school. No, it's not carpentry. It's not electrician. It's just a more advanced trade school.
I've heard about prisoners who go to prison and they go, dude, this is like school, right? Like you go to a room, the bell rings, it's time for lunch. You eat lunch, bell rings, it's time for working out. Like schools and prisons are set up the exact same way. And then like,
no shit.
And same thing with work, right? You're supposed to be there at 7:30 and you leave at a certain time. It's just teaching conformity. It's just teaching you to be a pencil pusher.
Yeah.
I mean, and so what school did you go to in high school? I mean, this was, you said college. Where'd you go into college? They had a horror elective. That sounds badass.
No, actually, that elective was in high school.
Damn, that sounds badass.
That was high school in the Bronx.
In the Bronx?
Yeah.
I'm from Chicago. I'm born in Chicago, Puerto Rican from Chicago, and we have Chicagoans have, they call us a second city, but even if you're Puerto Rican, there's no word, Puerto Ricans from New York have a word, New Yorican, right? We have no other community has that, and so, when I hear about the Bronx, I shout out to my friend Marlena. I mean, so I got to think that also was a great place for you to be, because the Bronx, Harlem, in Humboldt Park, shout out to Humboldt Park in Chicago, being around Puerto Ricans who are actively engaged in their own education, self-education, right? And in changing, bettering, uplifting their community. I mean, what kind of environment was that? I mean, what kind of, not only you're meeting professors, but I'm sure you're meeting other people that are fucking, people in New York they act like they're on 5 cups of coffee.
Yeah. Very true. But actually at that young age, It was that professor that sort of opened up my eyes. I didn't have that community. I had to find my own community. I just wasn't surrounded with it. Like I mentioned, I was a black sheep. My friends and my family just we didn't have the same vision. So
That's
I
putting it
had
nicely. Yeah. That's nice.
yeah,
Next time
we
next
just
time my
didn't.
grandma or my mom's worried about like, what I'm doing, what are you doing with your life, Poppy? Hi, Poppy. What are you doing with your life? I'll be like, Ma, Grandma, we just don't have the same vision.
No, and I mean, here's the thing, right? So that's something that I had to learn over time is that your friends and your family, particularly in our communities, right? Because the culture, the way of thinking is generally the same. Regardless, si eres dominicano, puertorriqueño, mexicano, the culture is generally the same. And that there are people that love you and got your back. I mean,
Yeah.
any issue, any problem, I had the whole block. I had a posse for everything. They always supported me. However, in things when it comes to me either improving myself, my education, or this becoming more of a voice when it comes to social issues, that's where they just saw a little bit differently because culture teaches them, por ejemplo, machismo, right? So they're just not are going to understand the feminist movement and the fact that why shouldn't I get paid the same as este tipo que está al lado de mí,
Yeah.
when I have more experience, why should I stay at home or rush home early to cook and clean? Why can't I stay, at work or take this after school program? And why can't he stay at home? O sea, que
Yeah.
that's one issue, right? The other thing is when it comes to us educating ourselves or just in general our goals on what we want to do. I just sort of learned that if they can't see it for themselves, they're not going to see it for me, right? So it
Yeah.
has nothing to do with the love, and that they're always going to be people that are going to support me. They just can't understand this concept of where I want to be in my life or what I want to do in my future. They can't understand it.
Yeah.
And since they can't see it for themselves, they're just not gonna support me. It has nothing to do. You or sea que you have to sort of dissect the two. You shouldn't have to,
Yeah.
but in our cultures, you have to think that way in order to not create more conflict, right, within your friends and family. Because at the end of the day, there's still people that got your back. They're gonna hold you down no matter what.
Yeah.
But it's just this about you advancing yourself in any type of way, professionally or whether it be education or relationships. Here
Right.
goes the machismo part. Just that whole portion is just it's a culture thing. So
Yeah.
in that aspect, you have to attack the culture first, and then know sort of when to choose and pick your battles.
Yeah, I mean that's so important. I especially with my grandma, I bring up my grandma a lot because she's like the matriarch of our family. Everybody's, since we're kids, everybody's doing everything. And is it okay? What does grandma think? A new girlfriend, what does grandma think? And I realized that like she's, when she's nagging me, Poppy, Poppy, what are you doing with your life? What are you doing with your life? She's just afraid for me. She's afraid that what I'm
Mm-hmm.
chasing is not going to work out. And I have to understand. I of course understand that. Nobody understands that fear more than me. I'm the
Yeah,
motherfucker
yeah,
doing it, right?
yeah, exactly.
And the whole machismo thing too is that, and I like to point this out because machismo sucks. It's a terrible thing. It's it's the patriarchy, but more than that, it's deep cultural within Latino culture,
Mm-hmm.
and how it affects women, of course, right? I like to point out that it affects men. Machismo is the kind of thing where I wanted to start being a writer and write these like very personal essays. In machismo culture, men don't do that. Men keep everything close to the chest, right? Men aren't supposed to be cerebral. Men are just
Mm-hmm.
supposed to work with their hands and work all day and shut up and that's it. So if you
Mm-hmm.
want to be a writer, get in it. Manos caída, all that stuff. Like you have to be a certain way. So machismo sucks for everybody, right? And you just got to get
Mm-hmm.
rid of it.
Exactly, and that's a really good point. And extending on that, por ejemplo, o sea que, um, I'm going to take the example of Puerto Rico, where here the machismo is really out of hand, and not only that, but it's really, I mean, it's a Republican island, right? So they're really huge on religion. Y todo es como que men are not allowed to. I mean, mental health is an issue here. Men are not allowed to like cry. O sea que I've seen where the parents are telling their young sons, ay, por favor, deja de estar con ese lloriqueo. And it's just like, wow, I would never say that to my kids, to any child. O sea que stop being such a crybaby. I mean, who does that?
Right.
You know, o sea que you're inhibiting you're not validating their feelings, and they may have all right, or you know, where they just say pray it off. I mean,
yeah, I was gonna ask you about that. There's a really popular politician in Puerto Rico who, I think it's a she or he. They believe in conversion therapy. I mean, conversion therapy is still a thing in Puerto Rico, right?
That's a huge well, it's one of the controversies here on the island, is that there are very many people that are for it, primarily the red and the Catholic, and since they are the majority, it's still been going back and forth. So Rosselló, who was the last governor who we, with a lot of protests,
kicked out.
kicked out, basically. I was trying to find a nice word and not curse.
You and the people of Puerto Rico and the governor of Puerto Rico had different visions.
Yeah, exactly. Out with his head. But one of the few things that he did right was that he abolished that. He basically said that conversion therapy is not ethical. It should not be practiced. Pero ahora, con Wanda Vázquez, who was the interim, so she lifted that ban. And she was an interim governor. She tried to participate, but she got one of the lowest votes, and so unfortunately we have another corrupt one. I mean, they're all corrupt, but whatever.
Yeah, I mean,
so yeah.
Let me ask you, just while we're on the topic, I mean, the status question. I mean, what do people what is the general sense of the status question, or, you know, basically, you know, becoming a state, keeping the status quo, or independence? People, you know, there's all this controversy, and I talk about it all the time. What is your sense, as, you know, as a poet, as an activist, as a small business owner, you know, what is your sense of what people want for the future of Puerto Rico?
All right. So I can't speak for everyone, right? But what we did see from the last election is that people want change. It's the first time where, in the history of Puerto Rico, the Republican Party has always, it's been a landslide. It's been hands down. They're the majority. It's always been Republican governor after governor after governor. This last election, there were a lot of independent parties. When you take the PIP, which is one of the oldest independent movements, and all of the other independent parties, and you take them together, it was almost an equal, which is a history in the making, which is a great sign in that ya la gente está cansada. They want change. They don't necessarily see, they're finally, after years, saying that, you know, just it isn't working anymore, and they're more open. So while still a Republican governor won, however, it wasn't by the landslide that they usually win, because now all of the, between the PIP and all of the other independent movements, I mean, ideally the best thing is, right, is for all of them to sort of join as one. Right. But even if that doesn't happen, the people are speaking, and that they're sick of what's going on. and they want change. Apart from that, one of the greatest things is that now we have in the legislation and the Senate, the first LGBTQ. We have, ¿qué más? Tenemos una afrodescendente. I forgot what else. We have another PIP leader, which is the first in the Senate, because we didn't have that independent
party
movement, the independent party within the Senate. So it was a lot of progress, a whole lot of progress. So I'm excited for the next 4 years.
For sure. And what I'll say about Puerto Rico that I'm always very proud of and happy to see is that women politicians, women leaders are very front and center in Puerto Rico, more than I think in a lot of other Latin American countries, right? I mean, even if you don't like them or not, like Wanda Vasquez or, the mayor of San Juan, who I think should run for governor, I think she'll be the first president of an independent Puerto Rico. Here's hoping. But the other thing I wanted to bring up was, I saw one thing I wanted to say before anything, going to your website, the cool thing is that you guys have a blog, right? I mean, what other, and that's where I read about the conversion therapy thing. You're teaching, there's a piece from March, 11 inspiring Puerto Rican women from colonial history books don't teach us about. I mean, so that's really cool. I suggest people check that out. And if you ever want to write for Mano, we would be happy to have you.
Yeah, of course. I'm actually working on something now in regards to the privatization that's happening in Puerto Rico.
I was just going to bring that up. They're trying to sell land in El Yunque, right? Or right by it. What's going on there?
No, well, yeah, but it's more so in regards to the corporate companies taking over private
and all that
private
stuff.
and necessary services, like water, energy, telephone, so all the basic services.
But it's funny because they're doing this in the United States too with the schools, right? They'll defund the schools, not give them all the tools that they need to succeed, and then they say, "You see, government sucks. We can't." The government's in bed with these private companies, and so the government, whatever they're in charge of, they fumble it and they go, "Oh, we don't know what to do. Might as well give it over to the private sector." Because the private sector, quote unquote, they run things better, which is a fallacy, right? And so you see. And that's capitalism for you. Capitalism, I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but the end goal of capitalism is to privatize everything, right? Privatize airspace, now they're privatizing your information, the data about you is now currency. And so that can't be good for a colony. It's a colony already. And so to be a colony, meaning you have no political rights, and then everything's privatized, you have no economic rights. I mean, what are some of the what's being done to stop that?
So here's the thing, right? I mean, I'm not totally against privatization, because in some instances, basically what it is, I mean, it's not always about the government selling off, right? It's not always about the money. It's about, at some point they realize that they cannot manage, and so they sell it to someone who they think can do a better job. That's the essence of what privatization is. That's why you do it. It isn't for money, but of course everyone wants a huge profit, particularly if it's the government or the private sector. Of course they have their interests. They're not gonna, por ejemplo, they're not gonna buy over a bankrupt company unless there was some way for them to win back a lot of money. That's just it's just common sense. Any investor wants their money back. Otherwise, it'd be charity, right? So it's business at the end of the day.
Right.
But the initial idea of privatization is always because, para ponerlo bien sencillo, it's always like, listen, I'm doing a fucked up job. I'm gonna sell it to you. who I think, because I have a ton of bidders, I think out of A through Z, company J can do the best job. Now let's negotiate price.
Yeah.
Right. So that's what privatization is. And in Puerto Rico, there's been many companies that has come over here who have bought over the essential services to
Airport,
Puerto Ricans,
right? Which was public for a long time, is now.
I mean, the airport, the tolls, but the one that was successful is the telephone line. I mean, now we have competition. Now I have a choice of who I want to go with, and I have the same. I can either go local or use the same companies that are available in the U.S. So now there's competition, right? So it was bought over by a private entity, but it's no longer a monopoly.
Right.
So there are the advantages, right? I mean, of course, when you're starting out, there's always, that hurdle and always a lot of hiccups, but years down the line, it was the best thing, because now we're not forced to deal with one company that's fucked up. We deal with their prices. It is what it is. Yeah. Now we have, I can go, AT&T decides to keep, now AT&T here in Puerto Rico, we have a local internet service, which is Liberty. And they also have most of Latin America. So Liberty bought over AT&T for Latin America. So now they've been merged. So, por ejemplo, this merge happened months ago, but it's only now that we're starting to see the impact, like most contracts. So, por ejemplo, de aquí a unos meses, if I decide, they're now raising my prices, you know what? I'm going to go with Claro, which is local, or I'm going to go with Sprint, or I'm going to go with T-Mobile. I have that choice now that we did not have 30 years back.
Right.
So there are positives, right?
Yeah.
So it's sort of like a case-by-case basis.
No, and then that works for like the telephone company. Remember, AT&T was, I think it got so big that they broke it up back in the 80s or the 90s. And then you see that with cable companies. It's good that there's competition, but I would push back on, giving private companies or giving like public education or the education of kids over to private companies, because it's like a private company, like you said, they're after money, and the way you set it up was like, okay, there's all these bidders, and we're going to go with the person that we think is going to do it the best. But in Puerto Rico and Honduras and Mexico and the United States, it always turns out that the company that gets it, tal fulano who's on the board is the brother or the brother-in-law of the governor or the guy who's, so it's like it never works.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. Yeah.
So I mean, again, I want to thank you for your time, for coming on. I mean, I wanted to just roughly like, what's been some of the obstacles of running the merch side, especially, but what's been, how has your time in the pandemic generally been, and what are some of the obstacles? I mean, I'm sure people are so interested in, like, you're running this ethically sourced, socially aware, conscious company. What is, I mean, obviously you need espresso, so like, tell me about the problems, man.
Well, I mean, I do, but I also work full time. I'm a single parent. Homeschooling was a bitch. And then of course I'm trying to run this. Now that the pandemic is back up, I'm trying to figure out how I can start doing the open mics, and that's taking up a lot of my time as well. I'm trying to figure out what's the safest place, how best to integrate it, and also integrate that with the merch. Should I sort of keep it together, or keep it separate the way it is now? I mean, La Salita Cafe, por ejemplo, LSC swag is La Salita Cafe swag. Right. So it's sort of under in the same house, but it's o sea, debajo de la misma sombrilla, but it's a separate entity.
You're kind of talking about branding, right? I mean, but I like that about your brand, that it's all together, right? Poetry and social justice and this merch, right? It all ties together.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, the mission, it's all about the mission, right?
Right.
That's what at the end of the day keeps us focused on who we are, what we want to do, and it helps us know, o sea, que where to go, particularly when it comes to collaborations, where sometimes, they try to sway you, or listen, I can give you XYZ,
Yeah.
but this, and it's like,
Preach.
you know what? Yeah. And it's like, you know what? It just, we're not aligning, and it keeps me focused on who we are, and what we want to do. It's also important that I keep that intact, because, por ejemplo, on the merch side, I do donate a portion of those proceeds in order to local initiatives that are doing the legwork. So I have to practice what I preach, right? I can't,
Yeah.
So that keeps me inside. But in far as challenges, with COVID, really the only challenge that I have is, with the education, teaching people that, and I guess it also goes hand in hand with proving that what we have has more value, right? Compared to the $5 t-shirt that you can get across the street, because it's $5 t-shirt that you can get across the street is not the same quality. It's not going to last you more than a month after washing. It's screen printing that's going to fade. And aside from that, they don't donate anything. They're making 80% margin that's going in their pocket, versus my margins are smaller because I have ethical, organic, or recycled fabrics, but I'm also donating. And aparte de eso, o sea, que it's not a copy paste of what you saw in 20 other stores.
Exactly.
It's a messaging that it's really tailored to those people who feel like, listen, either I'm behind this movement, or this is me they're speaking about. And listen, this is me. This is, the people that wear the merch is either, por ejemplo, you were in Poesía en Rebeldía. Most people are the activists, or they're writers in some sort, and they're like, yeah, this is me. Or some of the other merch where it's just like, you know what, this is a movement that, I don't care about shocking people about. The whole shock factor is what I'm looking for, because I'm looking to spark a conversation, because it's in sparking that conversation that we can sit and have that dialogue and then make change. That's where the real impact starts. It's not avoiding or skirting the issue. It's sitting down like adults and talking about it. So if I got to shock you, then that's what I'm going to do.
Spoken like a real black sheep. I mean, that's how I was in my family, in my circle of friends. Like, you always know, like, whatever's taboo. For me, a taboo is like, okay, we need to talk about that. There should be no taboos. Like, taboos are what keep us from building the better society that we all want, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
But thank you so much. I mean, I know it's Friday, and if you're in Puerto Rico, so you don't want to be cooped up inside. Oh, speaking of, how did Puerto Rico handle the pandemic? I mean, what would you think?
Well, so they. You're asking a lot of hard questions today. So we actually it was very strict. Wanda, I'm not a fan of hers, because in her previous position as in the justice system, she was just horrible. She let get away a lot of politicians who clearly paid her off. Pero in when we're talking about the pandemic, I think we are still number one in the restrictions of the pandemic compared to the United States. So we had lockdown, we had curfew. The restaurants, they were either closed. It was in the very beginning. It was only supermarkets, pharmacies, and little grocery stores, gas stations. But even at the gas stations, you weren't able to buy anything there. It was just gas. O sea, que they had very strict rules. And the governor, he had every 2 weeks where they revised it. Ante era Wanda, now is Pierluisi. So every 2 weeks they sort of revised it. It's now recently where there's no more curfew and they lift it a lot, but that of course has a lot to do with the fact that la vacunación is up. Vaccinations.
Yeah.
They've vaccinated a lot of people. But it was very strict.
Is there a lot of people who are not wanting to get vaccinated in Puerto Rico? Or I mean,
right now it's under half the population.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, which if you compare it to the United States, the percentage alone, it's great. However, we only have like 3.4 million inhabitants, right?
Right.
So they could do better.
Yeah,
they could do a lot better.
I mean, yeah. I tell people, like, you know, and maybe you have something to say about this. You know, I hear from other Latinos, I've heard it, that Puerto Ricans have no culture. And I'm like, well, first of all, what are you talking about?
Wait, what does that mean?
Yeah. I'm like, what are you talking about? We're only 7 million people in the 7.5 million Puerto Ricans in the whole world. And if you think about everything that Puerto Ricans have done, like every famous actor, singer, activist, they're all Puerto Rican, right? I mean, half of Hollywood is Puerto Rican, half of Broadway is Puerto Rican. Rita Moreno, you know, the list goes on and on and on. But how important was?
Hello, that's wait, hold up. Let's talk about the salsa that we have today. Gracias a the New Yorkers.
Yeah.
Because salsa existed before New Yorker, that ¿cómo que se dice? How do you say that time capsule? Salsa already existed. Era salsa cubana, pero it was a whole lot different. Is nothing compared to that. So it's o sea que the salsa that we have today, thanks to the New Yorker movement, eso es lo que yo. Those are the words that I was looking for. Es como que una mezcla entre salsa cubana, which is back in the day sounds
more formal,
nothing like.
Right? It was more.
Es que the sounds are completely different. The instruments are different. It was completely different. It doesn't. If you were to listen to the salsa de Cuba de antes, de la época, it doesn't sound like salsa. So it's a mixture of salsa, it's a mixture of bomba y plena, it's a mixture of boogaloo, which was very popular in New York during those times. And we sort of meshed it together. So the salsa that most people dance in the clubs and listen to the radio es gracias a the New Yorker movement.
Yeah.
So when they say that Puerto Ricans have no culture,
I know.
Gracias a nosotros, people are dancing
when I heard that,
everywhere.
When I heard that, my tongue almost fell out of my mouth. I was like, what? And never mind, you're talking about salsa. Never mind hip hop, the role that Puerto Ricans had on hip hop in the Bronx.
Exactly.
Or that or reggaeton, hip hop and reggaeton have taken the world by storm. They are a global sound, right?
Yep.
But yeah, we could talk forever about Puerto Rican culture. And again, we're small, you know, I'm not going to throw shade on Mexicans or anything, but Mexicans, there's 130 million motherfuckers in Mexico, right? There's only 3 in Puerto Rico. And for all that culture to come out of a tiny, you know, population we got culture coming out the ass.
Well, also, I mean, you really can't compare Mexico to us, right? Because Mexico has very strong indigenous ties versus we were colonized, right? So the Taínos were massacred. The Spanish came, they imported black slaves. So we're a mix, right? So we, o sea que our roots were in essence erased.
Yeah.
So you really can't compare a colonized island to a country that remains untouched, and just over the years they had the advantage of flourishing within their own history.
Right. Exactly. I mean,
so that's another thing. O sea que not to diminish Mexico, pero como que you really can't compare us to anyone. If you're gonna compare us to someone, you're gonna compare us to Hawaii.
Yeah.
Or Guam.
Right.
another colonized place. But even those, it was only Puerto Rico where all of our Taínos were killed off, and then came the Spaniards, and then lo africano. O sea que that now became who we are today.
Basically, like a Trigueño nation, basically.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and not only so the colonization, but like the fact that we have such a vibrant culture underneath that brutal colonialization, because we're not colonized by France or Spain. We're colonized by the United States of America, the most powerful, richest, smartest, evilest, empire that's ever lived. They know what they're doing. And for us to be so vibrant and to still, everybody knows what it means to be Puerto Rican. If you're not Puerto Rican, you know what it means. And that's because we fight for that identity. We fight for that culture.
Yeah, somos una gente bastante orgullosa. True.
And speaking of, just one last question, and I asked this about a lot, especially Puerto Ricans that live on the island. You were in the Bronx, and then when did you move back, and what was it important for you to move back? I mean, as a member of the diaspora, I wasn't born in Puerto Rico, but it's this whole thing of like, once you're starting to make it in the world and you're an adult, isn't it our duty to, and I'm asking myself this, right? Isn't it our duty to go back to Puerto Rico and live there? And that's the way we're going to raise it up, is that if everybody comes home and brings their talents and their energy.
I don't know. It's getting dark here, so sorry for the dimness. It's looking at. Do you mind? I'm just gonna turn on the light because I feel like it's way too romantic.
Nice. I thought a cloud passed. I thought a cloud passed over or something.
Ahora sí. So I don't know. I was actually I traveled while as an adult living in the United States. I worked in the fashion industry, and I was doing pretty well, no responsibility. So
What'd you do specifically? What'd you do?
Well, I worked for several different companies. Victoria's Secret, Hugo Boss was one of them. But I worked on the production end of it. So I traveled a lot to the factories. I negotiated prices and
nice. So that's exactly.
So I had that experience to rent. Yeah, exactly. I traveled a lot. And eventually I moved to Switzerland. When I moved to Switzerland, I was there for about 8 years. It was the height, but it was the height of, I think it was in 2008, it was the height of the economic crisis in the States. And Switzerland being independent, it was really the smartest move, because I thought, well, I can find work there easily, and because of the fact that it's independent, it doesn't have that impact, that economic crisis. They're actually doing very, very well. So I was there for about 8 years, moved back in 2014. And speaking on what you just said, nosotros tenemos un dicho que dice, la cabra siempre regresa a la montaña. I wouldn't.
The goat always returns back to the mountain, or it always belongs to the mountain?
Exactly. So I don't think necessarily it's a duty, but it is, I feel, in every Puerto Rican sort of like that instinct to like, I need to move back. It's not necessarily a responsibility, but more of like a calling. Like, you know what? I gotta move back. It's like, la isla me está hablando. And I actually have a poem on that that speaks on the island, just sort of like always speaking to you, and you ignore it or you don't listen, but the island understands what you're feeling. The island knows when you're down, when you're depressed, when you're happy, when you're angry. The island is always there listening. Ella siempre está pendiente, como una abuela. She's always there waiting for you, waiting for you to say, Mommy, I'm coming home.
Wow, that's fucking beautiful, man. You're about to break my heart. I've been thinking about it, right? And it's hard to, especially if I'm not married to a Puerto Rican. So she's like, why do you want to move to Puerto Rico? You're like, you don't understand. The island me está llamando,
But teach her. That's technically her culture now.
Yeah, She was
But
born in
some,
Mexico. She was born in Mexico, and she don't want to go
ah,
back to Mexico. So she's Americanized. She loves America, you know. And I love
uh-huh,
America too, but you know, I'm just conflicted, right?
uh-huh.
But thank you.
Here's a tip. Here's a tip. Try to find the similarities between the culture, and that's how you bring her over here.
I mean, well, she's listening to the reggaeton all. I don't even like reggaeton. She listens to reggaeton all the time. So you know, don't talk to me about Puerto Rican culture. You're a bigger fan than I am. But thank you so much for coming on. Let people know where they can find you on social media and find out what you're up to and buy some merch, man.
So my social media pages are the same as the website. It's all LSC swag. LSC swag across the board in toda. It's pretty
lscswag.com
fine.
too.
Yeah, exactly. So it's very easy to find us.
Yeah, very
Or
nice.
they can visit my website, lscswag.com, and ahí tú tienes the social icons and where to follow us.
Thank you so much for coming on. Keep up the good work, and very very excited to see that this initiative is taking place anywhere, but especially back
Mhm.
home in I call it home. And I'm not even from there, but especially back home in Puerto Rico. I say home because you know the way the colonialism works. You know, if America wasn't there, I wouldn't be here. I'd be back there, right?
Right, yeah.
But thank you so much for coming on, and
Thank you. Thank you. Thank
have a
you
good
for the
weekend.
platform. I appreciate it.
Peace.
Thank you. You
Pa'lante.
too. Eso.
Take it easy.
Bye.